and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, maybe you do know me, maybe you don't. But we'll gloss over that now. So thanks very much for attending the session. I hope it's going to be useful. But having spoken to Lee, we're slightly going to kind of change what we were going to do about this. So the whole thing about lunch and learn, we're slightly going to change it, and we're going to be calling it lunch and do. Because what we'd like to do is like to make it a little bit more practical for people. Completely appreciate where everybody is at the moment in terms of site work and pressure around work. So we want to make this like a really practical session. As we just mentioned right at the beginning of the call, during the Rio community practice session this morning, Alex, Rob and Emma started to kind of talk about evaluation. Now, what I think a lot of people are aware of was that those people that were on the kind of initial meeting on the 5th of September was there was quite an emphasis on that this program of work is going to be looked at, is going to be monitored, and will be evaluated at the end of it. And I think that is providing quite a substantial challenge to us and to the wider program as well. So I thought it would be beneficial if we gave a bit of time, or as much time as is needed, to be honest, to talk about evaluation. It is, and we have talked about this a lot because it is a subject that I don't think we do more than we used to. That's for sure. Do we do enough? Potentially not. And obviously the rate limiting factor is the number of people that can actually do evaluation. Hands up, that's not me. And so, but we do have specialist skills in the team around this particular piece of work. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of hand over to Alex and the team, supported by kind of Rob and Emma as well, around the type of evaluation that we're going to be doing for the program, just so that everybody knows. I hate to use the phrase what is expected, but what we really need in order for the evaluation to be a success. Because what we've been talking about is that we do a lot of retrospective evaluation, but actually it needs to be a prospective one, or at least kind of as we're going through it as well. So Alex, I'm going to hand over to you. You have as much time as is needed. So I just want this to be a really open and honest discussion around what evaluation might look like for the program, but also, and following on from the session I just had with the South team a little while ago, about what that actually means for people on the ground doing the site work, in terms of what reports are needed, how often, what they might look like, just so that everybody knows we're on the same page.
Thanks, Chris. It's nice to say you've got as much time as you like, as opposed to the 18 minutes with the 4 minutes of questioning that I had at the end this morning. So, and can I just say, it's a relief to be greeted by so many friendly faces on this call. It's been a journey this morning, hasn't it? Like, gosh, what a stressful morning. But anyway, oh God, no. So yeah, I think what we wanted to try and do with Rio is, obviously it's been a really quick rapid improvement program that's kind of been pulled together with led by, as always, kind of you guys with GIRF colleagues and IUEC colleagues, that are going to be doing some fantastic work on sites, with some sites that you've already got relationships with, and I guess what we want to do is utilize evaluation, so some of my skills, but also we've got two brilliant people in Emma and Elspeth who are now supporting us from a PMO perspective, and evaluation and PMO, in my previous experience, work amazingly well together. PMO like pull a plan together, and really hold everyone to account, myself included, operational leads, people on site, and they're just a really fantastic supporting mechanism to ensure that data's captured, we know what it is that we're doing, when and how often, and then at the end of everything we've got a wealth of data to understand, so what happened and how can we learn from all of this. So we're coming at this evaluation for Rio from a really good planned perspective, because we've got Emma and Elspeth who are supporting us to capture and do all of this work and collect all of this information. And like Chris just said, we want this to be a learning process, so that throughout the 12 weeks, we don't just get to the end of the 12 weeks and go, right, what happened? We want to be able to touch points at sort of week 5, week 10, whenever throughout, and sort of say, where are we, what are we doing, and what do we need to learn to kind of do a little bit better. And that's not just focusing on some of the metrics that will be identified and kind of, you know, inputted in some of the weekly reports that you guys will be completing. It's also with some of the outcomes that are kind of being worked to achieve as a result of kind of solving some of the problems that we're kind of there for on site. So I'll just share my screen. You've seen enough of my face, so I'll put some slides up for you. Bear with me. Put that on there. So this just kind of gives you a bit of an overview as to, and apologies for those who were on the call this morning who saw this slide very, very briefly, albeit. So this is the stuff on the left is all of the kind of the documents and the things that will inform how we might demonstrate the outputs and the outcomes that are on the right hand side. So in the toolkit, I'm hopeful that everyone knows what I mean when I talk about the toolkit provided and sort of shared and discussed through with Lucy Barnett that's on a webinar. That recording is accessible, so if anyone hasn't seen that, very happy to sort of share and point in the right direction of where that might be. And that recording talks you through kind of all of the templates that will be needed to be completed to contribute to some of this evaluation. And all of these templates, so the things in red are the things that aren't included in the toolkit, so please just ignore those for a second. But things like the PDSA template, the reporting template, and the evaluation template, they're going to be really great pieces of sort of data that will be completed hopefully by improvement leads on site to give us a really good understanding of a picture of the experience of what's happening week by week, so that we can then build a story about, okay, so these are the metrics that are underpinning some of the work that it is that we're doing, but what are some of the outcomes that we need to measure in addition to using those metrics? So how can we kind of supplement measuring those with potentially surveys or some of the after action reviews that we might add in towards the end of the process? So things around outputs and outcomes we're hoping to evidence. We're looking at processes implemented and any kind of changes made, and that'll all come across kind of in some of the descriptive wordy, you know, information that you guys provide on some of the weekly reporting templates. Any improvements made, so that sort of looks specifically at some of the metrics. Experience of taking part and the different support is felt to have made, so that's a reflection kind of on sort of satisfaction levels from how well kind of improvements being experienced by sort of sites. Capability skilled in, so building skills to kind of work differently. Whether or not confidence change will be sustained, and then learning to inform delivery of future support programmes, and those kind of looking at enablers and barriers of improvements and changes there. And then I've put in bold at the bottom there, kind of we're really dependent on the completion of some of these pro formas that have been provided in that toolkit. And please don't think that the onus isn't just on kind of you guys as improvement leads to provide all this information. That's where myself, Emma and Elspeth are absolutely there to help you guys. We've just been on the health and wellbeing webinar just a minute ago, which is really great to have a conversation with, just off topic slightly. But we were just talking in there around we're here to support to complete some of these pro formas and to capture some of this information. Emma and Elspeth have been in previous roles where they've specifically completed highlight reports, you know, as a result of doing improvement work. And this is exactly the type of information that we need to be capturing to inform in our evaluation. So please do reach out to us should you need any help or any work in capturing that information. Just move on to the next slide. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on why kind of PDSAs are important and how they're kind of similar to sort of the logic models that kind of underpin evaluation itself. So a logic model is kind of, and I'm sure we probably all know this, but just in case. So logic models are really simple tools that support any kind of planning of evaluation. You can see that we're capturing kind of the input, so some of the energy and some of the kind of financial, sometimes inputs that are going into kind of doing an improvement project or methodology or something like that. They allow systematic consideration of the key components of any change and relationship between them, and then the overall vision. And they really help to understand what the key indicators are for success, and therefore what we should measure to then understand our impact. So then similarly, PDSA cycles, what we want to know is what we're trying to accomplish. So kind of what's the problem it is that we're solving. Then from that, how will we know if a change is an improvement, and then what changes can we make that will result in an improvement? And from that, we can then draw out any kind of outcomes to measure, to measure what it is that we need to measure to change in terms of those outcomes that we're trying to improve. And it's kind of like your hypothesis that you're sort of questioning, you know, what is it that we want to do? What's the end product and what's the end goal? So I'll just move us on to the next slide. So this is just an example of the weekly report that's included in the toolkit that's going to be sent out, and I think that's already been sent out and already been submitted by some site leads that are doing some of the Rio work. So this is something that, again, we're really happy to support completion of on a weekly basis. But the more detail that's provided in here, the better. That would be fantastic. And then in terms of the aim statement, it probably should be consistent with national goals, relevant to the length of the project, pose a constructive challenge for the organisation, and then follow kind of SMART principles. I won't go through SMART principles. I'll assume everyone knows what SMART principle is. And then on the final slide, these are the bits in red that I sort of touched on at the beginning. So these are kind of additional evaluation methods that could be the problem that will be developed to support measurement of the Rio programme at the end. So a feedback survey, what I'm mindful of here is that there's already a feedback survey that's where there's a pro forma in the toolkit itself. But what we've not got within that toolkit, in that pro forma, it's not specific to each of the sites. So what we're trying to do with some of the PDSA outputs and some of the weekly report outputs is really understand what the outcomes are for some of those sites, intended outcomes, so we can then develop some questions, so we might be able to measure whether or not those outcomes have actually been achieved. And by using a survey, we'll be able to gain some of that information. So if we get great information back throughout some of those reports, we'll be able to develop a really great feedback survey to ask, you know, how's this happened? Where's the dial changed? What's your confidence in terms of continuing to improve it in that way? Then an after action review. I think I've touched on this before, but I think what we don't tend to do in ECIST really is talk about and reflect as a team, and from improvement leads, understand what insights you guys carry. You know, you're on site all the time. You've got relationships that are really strong with sites. I'm currently working with Lou and Karen up in Broad Green, and they know, you know, you guys know ins and outs, don't you, kind of what's happening at Broad Green, kind of the differences that are being made. You've got brilliant experience that we need to capture and really draw out. And by having those after action reviews with colleagues that are leading some of the work in Rio sites, we'll be able to, you know, really pull out the experiences and what's happening from your guys' perspective. What would you say to an improvement lead next time that's doing similar work? And then touching on the sustainability piece. So we know that this is a 12-16 week programme. There'll probably be another one of these programmes next year. But in 6 months' time, after the Rio programme's complete, our site's still doing some of the things that, you know, that you guys kind of help them to achieve. Are they still doing some similar work? So we need to probably check in with them to understand what any kind of long-term impacts and outputs are. So can we put kind of a 6 months coaching style call in just to check in and have some kind of specific questions to follow, so we've got some cross comparison across sites. And that's kind of it from me, from an evaluation perspective, in terms of some of the methods that we're going to look at for the Rio evaluation programme. this is a reporting template in a spreadsheet, and I know Emma's joined the call, and I only told her a minute before this call started that I was doing this, and if she was available, she'd be able to pop up and talk us through this slide and sort of her and Elspeth's input. So Emma, if you're there, it'd be great for you to jump in.
So this is just like a plan on a page basically for the submissions. So yeah, it's just obviously you can see the weeks along the top here, and then listed out are the documents along the left hand side, which obviously are within the toolkit. And then it's just obviously there's if you read along the lines, you can see, for example, the reporting template is required weekly. We'd expect some of these other documents to be done by week 4. So that's why I've put them in at week 4. And then obviously you can see there's end of project documentation, which we've put at week 12, but we understand that could be any time between 12 and 16 weeks from depending on how the program runs. So yeah, it's just a bit of a timeline, which is just so that you know when to submit what and when. Yeah, and in addition to this, what we're going to do is send out reminders to the improvement leads involved with each site, and it will attach each document at the point when it's due. And then you can actually just at the moment they're to be submitted to the mailbox, so it'll attach the document when it's due, and then it'll have the mailbox address in the reminder for you to send it to. So yeah, just as an additional reminder, and that's really that slide really.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks.
All right,
I'm going to stop sharing. Can I hand back over to you, Chris? I think that's where we finished. Has anyone got any questions or any comments? Feeling much calmer than a couple of hours ago, so thanks for that.
In fairness, you actually did that in 16 minutes.
I did.
So,
I did.
I'm just that's all I'm saying. Rob.
Yeah, it's the quality of the audience, Alex, not the ridiculous. I guess it's really interesting to see that in and of itself, and I just thought maybe a little bit of context might be helpful right now. I suppose the evaluation in action is typically something that we might do alongside our people we're working with on sites, but actually because of the current types of engagement, shall we say, and we're involved in different types of engagements, what do we know about the work that we're doing here, and if we do get that ask, like you mentioned, how can we explain ourselves, or how can we describe the effectiveness of what we've done? And I'll just take the readiness check as just an example of that. How do the prevailing conditions of these types of engagements influence our improvement? Is a sort of like a rhetorical question I've been asking myself, in terms of the different way in which we're coming at these organizations, different SROs in different places. I guess other things like how accurate is our readiness check at predicting improvement? I don't know. And if we're doing a 12-week engagement, is it any better or any worse at predicting likely impacts of our work? So I guess it's all armor for us moving forward. It's all information to describe what we think is the effectiveness of these types of engagements. So I think the more we learn about these engagements, the better we are to argue our case either for or not, as the case may be. And I'm not sold on one way or the other, but actually, if we have got a clear narrative that accompanies this, then we're in a better place to have that conversation. And I guess if we know what we know qualitatively and quantitatively about these engagements, then of course, if the ask does come over the hill, we'll see whether it's a good investment of our time or not. Whereas at the moment, I don't think we can say that hand on heart. So I think there's a number of ponderables that we may know in our heart of hearts, but unless we actually do the evaluation, you won't be able to say with any sense of certainty. So I think it's a really, really good expectation we hold ourselves to account for moving forward over the course of the Rio thing to give us a sense of what that looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Giles?
I agree with so much of what Rob says, which clearly is unusual. But no, he made some really valid points. So I guess for me, evaluation of the work we do is this really seems to place it on that joint endeavour stage. This isn't us evaluating us. This isn't us evaluating an organisation. This is us and an organisation working together, agreeing some evaluation metrics and really looking for the so what. So it's quite a refreshing way of doing it. So my understanding is the expectation is that the organisation provides the weekly feedback with our support so that we can guide them and nurture them, nudge them, coach them to where they can start to evidence for their organisation, because I'm hoping that this will be information that they will want to use within their organisation and they don't see it as an irritating bolt on to what they're trying to do already. So I think we have to tread ever so lightly, and I'm minded by some things Zoe was saying earlier in a call that I couldn't get to speak because I had such a poor connection, but it's understanding the complexities of their life while trying to provide value and not add distraction. And the evaluation piece for us is just it could be gold dust if we stay firm and use our resources that we're being given and work together. And I will admit at times I've been looking at all the different things, feeling slightly overwhelmed. And what's really reassuring is we got people coming into this team from that PMO support aspect that can help herd some of us cats into providing something that will evidence value where we anecdotally believe we add value.
Great. Thanks, Giles. I really appreciate that. And agreeing with Rob, who would have thought it? It's Friday afternoon, so we're trying to be friendly. You know, there was the health and wellbeing checkup, so, you know, trying to carry that forward. Emma?
I just wanted to mention, in addition to that, because I'd done this yesterday actually with Alex, but it's perhaps worth mentioning on this call in this forum that I'm aware that this is like the first outing of the toolkit. So we actually set up lessons learned yesterday, which is a place where we can capture any sort of lessons that you've got as you use the toolkit. So, you know, is there something that you've discovered that we can capture it and then we can make any changes at the end. So so yeah, it's just to let you know that that's also been set up. So if you have anything, just email it over to me or whatever, and we can set that up. We might want to do like a lessons learned session at the end where we can all talk about how you found the templates or whatever and captured it formally. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know, like I said, without being like a bit of an echo chamber, the fact of the matter is that, I mean, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we do an awful lot of evaluation. You know, I've been in the NHS 20 years. Seldom have I heard of anybody doing any significant evaluation work. So this will be, I think this will be new, but correct me if I'm wrong, for a lot of people. And I think as well, there might be people that kind of go, it's just a load of form fill in. They're not really going to do anything with it. You know, we will, and I can't speak for kind of, you know, other people doing site work, but I think it's really important that we kind of lead by example on this one. You know, we've got a lot of resource around this particular piece of work, so I think it is really important that we are able to demonstrate what we've done, when we've done it, why we've done it, and what impact it's made. So thanks for that, Emma. Zoe?
Thank you. I feel that it's absolutely, it's important to evaluate the value that we add on site, the work, monitoring it, measuring it. I agree with what's been said already, but I also think there's an opportunity, and Emma's just touched on it, about evaluating the process. So I understand the Rio programme was set up at pace. It's collaborative work across some different systems. We all work very differently, but to being a site lead, it still feels very chaotic. And I think that there's a lot of learning around how we set things up, how we come together, how we communicate, you know, even kind of down to WhatsApp etiquette. There's stuff on the WhatsApp for the Rio program that, well, it blows my mind, some of it, and some of it I ignore. But then actually there are questions in there, and it's a really valid point. Somebody asked a question, I think it was last week, about the actual weekly reporting template. Are they for each pillar, or are they one update? And there was no response. So actually now supporting the site to complete one, I've just said, look, this is the first one this week. Let's just do one, because we don't want to create an an army of kind of report filling, where we are talking about busy, troubled systems and having that appreciation of the, the challenges that they're faced. So I think that we need to evaluate, or lessons learned about the communication, how this is set up. The meeting this morning was meant to be one thing, it ended up being another thing. But all of these things, if we don't learn and we don't evaluate and change something about it, we're just going to repeat the same thing, and there's going to potentially be another Rio program with different sites and different kind of expectations. And I think that we need to evaluate some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll re-emphasize that point as well, that on the 5th of September, there was that kind of emphasis from Julian, Kevin, and I think Tim Briggs as well, around there is going to be a lot of scrutiny about this program. Now, I've got no more insight than anybody else as to kind of what that more scrutiny might look like, and what that more scrutiny might what it might drive going forward. But I think we just do need to be prepared for that. So yeah, hopefully we can learn some lessons from this one. Lisa?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Chris. I've been in the team about 7-ish years now, and in terms of evaluation, I don't think we've ever done it like we are attempting to do with this, to get that level of detail, because we've always been really focused on what do the big numbers say on the dashboard, and are we having an impact on those or not, question mark. So I think this is a different way of doing things, and I think because it's different, we'll go through this process of some things feel like they're working well, others don't, and it's great that we've got an opportunity like this to talk about it really in a safe space, and for people to be able, like Zoe's just shared. But I just wanted to give a practical example. I reached out to Richard this morning, Richard Brownhill, after this morning's meeting, and we just had a bit of a practical chat around this, and he gave a classic example of something that is going to make a difference, but we wouldn't have captured had we have not been thinking about doing it this way. So he's been on site in Blackpool talking about a particular pathway, and they've got a point of care testing kit in ED for these pathways. But the feedback was, it's great when it works, but it only works 60% of the time, 40% of the time it's out of action. So Richard delved a bit deeper into, okay, do we know why 40% of the time it's out of action? And, what happens when it is out of action? How long does it take to get it fixed? And da-da-da-da. They went to have a look where it was, and Richard, as a fresh pair of eyes, saw it was right underneath a skylight. So whenever they had nice weather, which we don't get in Blackpool very often, being from Lancashire myself, but whenever they did get nice weather, the sun would shine in through that skylight and basically make this piece of kit hot. So then it was out of action. So at that moment, they went, let's just move it 0.5 metre away from underneath that skylight over there. And let's monitor now if we get 90% of capacity out of this piece of kit, and what impact that might then have on this particular pathway. And Richard and I were both saying, previously we'd probably just have done that, gone on site, done that, and gone, yeah, there we go, it's done. Whereas this now, he's going to capture it as like a little tiny mini PDSA and go back and, in a month's time, just say, so has the kit been working now? And, has it made a difference? And that might seem like a really small, trivial, insignificant thing, but for that team, it's probably going to make quite a big difference. Yeah. So, I just wanted to share that, because Richard and I, when we chatted this morning, just went, yeah, that's the stuff we don't capture, but that's the really, really rich, intelligent stuff we should be, because somebody else in another department somewhere might have a point of care testing kit sitting in the sunlight and having the same problems.
Yeah, and I suppose there is that before I come in. You know, we're on several meetings around this, and in fairness, I was on a meeting just now as well about that. You know, one person in one trust is doing this really good thing. And it's kind of like, what mechanism do we have for actually sharing this, and to kind of say, well, actually, with somebody down at Great Western is doing X, Y, Z, and actually it's because of this, and we might talk about it, and that's well and good, and it's like we said earlier about if you record something, that people actually go back and look at it or not. You actually need to be in that session to kind of say, right, well, what did that actually mean? Because if you just listen to it but recording back, I don't know whether you take it in as much. So, and that's a question for all of us, is how do we share, I say best practice, but even like good practice will do, rather than best, that actually, how do we share that so that people can say, oh yeah, we're doing this piece of work around that, and we find that as well. And how do, what did you do differently? How can we then incorporate that into our line of work? I don't know what that looks like, but hopefully Alex has put her hand up because she's about to answer that pertinent question. So over to you, Alex.
Not exactly, but just sort of going on, mentioning sort of what Lisa's just said. I think it's just really understanding the why. So, okay, the metrics have moved, and great, they're moved in a positive direction, but why has that happened? It kind of doesn't just stop at the end of, great, we've done success, the end. We don't know how or why. And I think the problem we have is not being able to draw a straight line between some of the stuff that is done on site, between some of the dials moving. And it's really, really, really difficult to do that. Now, I would argue 9 impossible. But if we know that what it is that we're trying to do and trying to solve, and if we're capturing all that information, then it makes it a hell of a lot easier to understand the why behind some of the movements, kind of on a high level perspective, I think, she says.
No, that's really useful. Does anyone else have any comments or questions to talk about evaluation? Because I really don't want to move away from this until everyone's kind of aware of what we're doing, why, and when I say we, I mean kind of the team. It's not me. So I just want everybody to be really, really clear about what is going to be required and what we're going to be doing. So that's no more questions. Great. Okay, perfect. So
can I just say, just to
we're giving you too much time now.
Sorry, stolen your thunder. Just to 100% confirm everyone's on the same page, and obviously there's not everyone that's doing some of the Rio improvement work is on this call now. But there will be a big email with lots of information and detail sent round from I'm not sure from who yet, but it's coming either today or early next week, with lots of details and information on, so including the toolkit and lots, and all of that. And you've got my contact details as well as Emma and Elspeth, so please reach out if needed. The end. I'll stop talking now, Chris, go on.
No, and just from me, as you would expect, really, I just say a massive thank you for the work that you're doing in this space. Absolutely supported by Emma and Elspeth and the evaluation group as well. I think it's really good that we have that as part of the wider group, and it's something that we need to utilise more. Not giving you more and more work, of course, but I think we need to utilise all of the skills and experience that we have. We are, as we've often talked about, we are a big team, a big group as well. And we need to make sure that we're fully utilising all of our skills and experience. There endeth my party political broadcast. So the next thing I want to kind of move on to is just so that everybody, and kind of the phrase that I want to get across today is that everyone knows what's happening. Okay, so in terms of kind of some of the data elements, I want to make sure that everyone's made aware of. So yesterday we had the Rio steering group. So although I'm phrasing it like Rio, obviously it encapsulates everything about urgent emergency care. So I'm saying Rio, but it doesn't necessarily just rely on that. But I just wanted to make people aware. So Paul sends out the weekly dashboard, but there is also a Rio version of that. So if you don't get access to that, I mean, I might just send it out to everybody because it'll probably just be easier. The only slight change to it, there's 2 changes, and it slightly compromises the way in which we send it out, because obviously you will get a regional view of the ECIST dashboard, either South Midlands, whatever. With the Rio, it's slightly more complicated because obviously they cross regions, but we can't send out the national dashboard for obvious reasons, aka I'll really get told off. So we can't do that. So therefore there is a Rio version of the dashboard. I'll go on to talk about that in a couple of minutes time because there's a slight variation in terms of what that looks like and what it contains. But there are two key measures that I just want to ensure that everybody's really, really familiar with. Okay, so there's the two primary targets for Rio, which are, in fairness, I've got some slides. I'm going to share my screen. So bear with. In fact, I'm just going to share it because then I can flick between various bits and bobs. Can people see my screen?
Yeah, Chris, I'm disappointed every time you say Rio that one of them's not John Taylor. I was expecting this fantastic picture. I'm disappointed now.
At some point, I will Google who John Taylor is. I mean, I imagine he's from Duran Duran, isn't he? Is he? I don't know. I only know Simon Le Bon, like everybody. You know, if you said Simon Le Bon, I'd have gone, oh, well, yeah, I get it, Duran Duran. Who was he in Duran Duran then? Was he the drummer or guitarist?
He was the nice one.
Was he? Have you got like a background? Have you got like wallpaper?
Maybe.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not pretending. I genuinely don't know who that is. I've got good musical knowledge, but I don't know who that is. Anyway, so I'm going to keep it on. Keep it on this view, if that's all right, just because I can take you through different things as well. So obviously for the Rio program, there are two primary measures and there will be several others depending upon the pillars that you selected for your individual sites. But the two primary measures are the number of 12-hour breaches and the number of hours in ED after 12 hours, AKA, one patient will breach 12-hour performance, or standard, call it what you will. And that will be one individual patient. But we also want to know how many hours on top of that 12 they have spent in the department. So that is the key measure, and we'll come on to talk about that in a minute. But I just want to talk you also through about the measurement proposal, because we've had discussions around this, and I'm not wedded to this methodology. It's a methodology that I came up with. It was relatively short notice, and it's kind of sticking. It hasn't stuck, and I just want to be really, really clear about that, so that I've kind of, absolved myself of any responsibility when we look at this as we're going through the program. But the way in which the proposal works is that we expect that those two measures will get worse during October, November, and December. I don't think I'm telling you things that you don't already know. But what we also want to know is could we then look at what we would expect it to be, and if it doesn't get to the level of expectation, you might kind of say, well, that's actually good. We thought it was going to be X, it was Y. That's potentially a good thing. So the way in which that has come up is that I've looked at, for every site in the country, I have looked at how many 12-hour breaches and how many hours over 12 hours there were in April to August 2023. And then as an example, I've then said, okay, so I've got a baseline time period. What does it then look like in September 2023? And I'll just pick these silly numbers just to kind of prove a point. So if one of our sites in the Rio program, or non-Rio, doesn't really matter because the methodology is the same. If one of our sites had an average of 100 12-hour breaches every month, and then in September 2023, they had 120, that's a 20% increase. I'm pretty sure anyway. So therefore, if we then have a look at what happened in April to August 2024 as a baseline time period, and then added on 20%, you could kind of say, well, that's kind of on the same trajectory as what happened last September. Therefore, if it only, we expect to go up by 20%, if it only goes up by 10%, that's a good news story. Okay, because if we expect it to get worse and we just kind of say it's gone from 100 to 110, we might kind of say, oh, blimey, it's gone up. Oh, that's not very good. And I think from a kind of an overall program perspective, we might kind of say, well, it's not really doing very well. But then what we need to do is we then need to compare that with the Rio sites compared with the non-Rio sites. So the way in which we're doing that is by using the weekly dashboard, or a slight variance to that. The two variants are, instead of on the normal dashboard, we've got COVID admissions and COVID occupancy. On here, we've got the two primary measures, number of 12-hour breaches and the time lost over 12 hours. But probably the better visualization that we will be using to kind of monitor the program as a whole is this graph over here. And what this shows is September to date. So I know that different on-site teams have started their operational improvement work at different times, but we've just gone for September as a kind of a proxy. And then guess what? As when the next dashboard will come out, we'll have a look at October, so on and so forth. Or we might look at different time periods. Doesn't matter, we've got the data. But what we can then say is for the two primary measures in terms of the methodology that I was saying about expected levels is where we are, blue line being the Rio, the red bar being non-Rio, and then the green bar being England. Apologies if those are not the colours, but they kind of look vaguely similar. We can then see where we are. So, for example, for September the 1st to last week, which I think was the 29th, where we are, where the Rio sites are compared to what we expected, we are at 87% of where we expected, aka the Rio sites are not as high as we would expect them to be. So that's a good news story. That is a good news story. The slight kind of fly in that ointment is that the non-Rio sites are only at 85%. So yes, all sites, well, not all sites, but both groups have not seen the level of increase in 12-hour breaches as we would usually expect from September last year in terms of the baseline methodology. But the Rio sites have seen a slightly higher increase. I suppose the challenge for us, though, is that if we only looked at one measure, the ability to reduce the numbers of patients who have breached 12 hours is a challenge, a significant challenge. If we then reframe it in terms of hours lost, we get to a much better news story. So actually, when we look at Rio compared to non-Rio, using the same methodology, the Rio sites are actually only at 93% of expected hours over 12 hours. But the non-Rio sites are actually even higher than where we would expect. So they're at 108% of the levels of expectation. So that's a really good news story because we're still seeing the kind of the same proportional increase in terms of 12-hour breaches. But the Rio sites, we have seen a greater reduction in non-Rio sites in hours over 12. That's good because actually, from what Kevin said right at the beginning on September the 5th about patients, clinical risk in the department, if we're reducing total time in department, almost by default, we'll be reducing crowding and hopefully increasing flow through the emergency department. So I'm just going to pause there to kind of say, does everybody understand the methodology? As much as I have explained it, hopefully people understand that. Okay. So what we've got to is, then I'm going to show you the dashboard. Here we go. Chris? So hopefully, oh, sorry, Nick.
I don't want to replay the conversation we've had on the email, but
yeah,
how do we know that there wasn't a difference in the summer baseline that we've taken for this year? So how do we know that the Rio sites, for example, didn't just have a crappy summer, therefore 20% of that is a very high expectation, and they've just underflown that high expectation because they weren't picked at random. They were picked because they stood out on a metric that was generated in summer. So we've picked organizations that were doing particularly badly in summer.
Yeah.
And then you're applying last summer's percentage increase to this summer where we've selected them out because they were bad.
Yeah.
So how do we know what's due to what?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And, I know we had this conversation at management group a little while ago. I don't know the answer to that right now. Unfortunately, yeah, our capacity is really, really constrained at the moment. And I know we should be prioritizing this, which we are, but that requires quite a bit of additional work. And I'll need to speak to Girth to find out how they create the GEMI score so that we can then recreate that to see whether there has been a significant difference in this summer compared to last summer. Because I don't know the answer to that question.
Because I think just in terms of the messaging, we need to potentially then caveat that risk that there is something else at play here rather than, because we're going from looking at a difference association with Rio, non-Rio, to assuming causation of its Rio that's made the difference.
Yeah.
And also the subjectivity of good, bad, or because is what we're after here is the truth as far as we can get it, isn't it? And that is what it is. I think there'll be a temptation from certain parties to find a number that looks as good as possible. And we just need to not play that game.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there will be an element of cherry picking to kind of go, right, we're going to be using X, Y, or Z. You know, I think there'll be an element of the monitoring using that methodology, but I think fundamentally we'll go down to a greater granularity in terms of the metrics that we want to have a look at. I mean, obviously you've got the pillar metrics as well. So, you know, and I think this is where we then need to move to in terms of, right, we're doing specific work. And I know I keep going on to Great Western, so I do apologize, Giles, talking about Great Western, but so Great Western have seen a really interesting, quote unquote, position in terms of their 12-hour performance has during early parts of September significantly improved. Their number of 12-hour breaches massively went down, but the past couple of weeks has significantly gone up. So if you look at it in terms of, in fact, we've got it here. So if I just show you so on this dashboard, you can see where each of the individual sites are, what their predicted per day breaches are, what their current average per day is, and where they are against predicted. So here, for example, you've got Great Western. So the methodology, right or wrong, has predicted that they should be having, or not should be having, they will have 25 12-hour breaches per day. They're currently only having 13. So they're at 53% of expected. But you can see actually that they started off the month really, really well, 12, 15, 16, 12, 9, 8, 1, brilliant day. But it's significantly gone up over the past week. So, you know, if you just looked at one measure in particular, you might kind of say, well, actually, it's because of et cetera, et cetera. But you need to have a look at a longer time period, taking on board different points. And this is where we kind of need to drive that conversation going forward. But unfortunately, we don't really have a mechanism for having that conversation. We might do internally in terms of ECIST, but I don't think we do in terms of the whole program. I know I just said an awful lot of words there, and I probably didn't even cover off anything. But that's the methodology as it stands. But I do think it needs additional work going on there. So I completely get on board your point there as well, Nick. But so yeah, so on the dashboard, you now have this table just to kind of see where the and I've got all of the sites on there. So this isn't just ECIST, it's also got the GERT sites on there as well. So we can see particularly where organisations are. So Peterborough and Adam Brooks have got significant challenges at the moment. But interestingly, you've got Gloucester, because Gloucester are actually below the levels of 12-hour breaches, but significantly above in the terms of hours over. So just looking at one metric in isolation isn't, once again, a particularly interesting thing. But on the dashboard, there's just a couple of things that I do just kind of want to draw people's attention to, just because as I've been having more conversations with people, I don't think, and once again, and I've said this a million times before, I get that everybody's not a data person, but there are some fundamentals that people should be able to use some of the products that we've got access to. So hopefully everybody should be aware that you have access to, via email, the SAPIT and the ECIST dashboards, and now the Rio dashboards as well. But also you should have access to SEDIT, the SAMIT 75, and also some of the additional dashboards that NHS England produces, including Model Hospital. If people don't have access to any of those, please let either myself or Paul know, and we can expedite those. I'm particularly conscious about SEDIT and the SAMIT, because I was speaking to somebody yesterday who said that they have been waiting for access to the SAMIT for about 2 months, and obviously we can't have that issue. So if anybody does have access issues, please let myself and Paul know, and we can chase it up with the GERT team as well. But you should all have access to that. But I just kind of want to highlight a couple of things. So once again, sorry, but I'm going to select Great Western. So hopefully you should all be aware of kind of what the main dashboard does and how it identifies things that are statistically significant. So obviously grey squares are Normal variation, don't worry about it. Black dots are statistically significant this week. One day, and I should stress that. So it's not looking at the whole week. It looks at what's happened in the past 7 days. And if any one day in the past 7 days has triggered, it will highlight that. So, for example, we can see there's been an issue around demand. We can see that it's been mainly driven through walk-in attendances, not ambulances, but also it's contributed to ambulance handovers, poor flow, which means that we've got patients who have not been treated in a timely manner. Interestingly, though, their long stay patients have actually come down, and we were kind of spitballing a few different ideas around this, because you've got league charts and things like that, but it's more about testing some of your hypothesis. Okay, so for example, you might be on site or you might be off site, and you might be kind of saying, okay, well, let's have a look at a few different things. So, okay, so my interesting one that I want to have a look at is my 12 hours, the number of breaches. So here we go. We've got my 12-hour number of breaches. Now, first things first is that you'll notice that it's gone significantly down. That's not necessarily what I just want to draw your attention to. And apologies if I'm being patronizing about this, because I really, really don't mean to. I just want to make sure that everybody's, got some level of skills in Excel. So you'll notice that line has gone off the bottom of the axis. Okay. There's loads of ways in which you can change the axis of a graph. The easiest way I find is if you just double click on one of the numbers, it'll bring up a bar over here, and you can see the minimum and the maximum level of the graph axis. So here, for example, it's at 0.8, and I want it to, well, it's probably only going to be about 0.7. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to type in 0.6, hit enter, and the graph will update. Okay, and you can do the same thing for minimum and the same thing for maximum as well. So just be aware of that. The reason why that's important is it's good to not have too much white space on a graph. Okay, it's really good, because if you do, you might not have the right scale. You might not be able to kind of emphasize one of the points you're trying to raise. So I'm just going to keep that at 0.6 for now, and then you can click off X for that. But then you might kind of say, okay, so it's been coming down, so that's really good. So that's what I was talking about. During September, they were starting to see a real reduction in the number of 12-hour breaches, but then all of a sudden, the latter stage of September, it started to increase quite significantly. You're like, okay, well, does that mean that it's also contributed to the amount of time over 12 hours? Okay, well, let's stick that on the graph as well. And you can see that actually it's come down at a greater rate. So the level of reduction has been greater than the overall number of reductions in 12-hour breaches. So that's a good news story. So not only are we reducing 12-hour breaches, but also the time in department has come down. So therefore, you might imagine that crowding's gone down as well. You'll also notice that the graph is the line's almost off the minimum, but we're going to leave that on there for now. But once again, you start kind of hypothesizing, and once, if I was on site, we might kind of say, well, what does that actually mean? What might that look like? So if we're seeing more patients now that are breaching 12 hours, but also their time in department is more than 12 hours, I wonder if that means that actually flow through the department, and one of the surrogate measures for flow might be the time to treatment. So are we seeing patients in a timely manner? It's right at the bottom, time to treatment. So we can have a look at this and kind of say, well, okay, I mean, it has taken a little bit of a decline, but it's not too significant. But okay, so we're then saying we've got more patients in the department. We're saying that patients are spending longer in the department. We're saying that we're not seeing patients in a timely manner. Another good way to have a look at that and to incorporate some additional measures is say, well, I wonder if this is impacting on ambulance handovers. So let's have a look at ambulance handovers. Okay, so at the same time as 12-hour breaches came down, time in department came down, and crowding came down, we saw a reduction in ambulance handovers. But there was definitely this period around mid-September where we started to see all of these measures go in the opposite direction. So what you can then do is, maybe I'll have a chat with Paul and kind of say that we've got 4 measures on here. I mean, you could put, I don't think it would make a great deal of difference to kind of put 6 or 8. I suppose we want to be conscious that to be able to tell a story through here is really important, because as we go on site, and I've been chatting to a few different sites this week, they have the anecdote, but sometimes they don't have the data to back that up. But that's why you can use data such as this and the SEDIT and the SAMIT to be able to utilize all the data that's available to you to help drive improvement going forward. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure that we have a hard finish at 1:30, and I want to have a couple of minutes to see if anyone's got any comments or questions that people may have. I know there's been some chat in the chat box, and I will go back and take a look at that, but I'll happily take any comments or questions that people may have. Or not, as the case may be. Giles.
I know you're going to add me to the list for the Rio. Does that come out on a twice weekly basis as well, or once a week?
So at the moment, I'm only doing it on a Tuesday, but it can replicate the weekly dashboard and come out Tuesday and a Thursday as well.
I don't want to make more work for you once a week. I think we'll be fine. Yeah,
I think from a kind of an improvement perspective, if we just stick it to once a week, I think that's okay. But it's, I mean, you say workload, it's not a particularly onerous job. I'll be guided by others on that. Lee?
Thanks, Chris. It's more of a comment more than a question. I know from previous experience that quite often it's really difficult because you have that sliding scale, especially Great Western, that's come down. It looks like something else has happened previously.
Yeah.
And I think there is, my experience is the board reports are often brilliant sources of knowledge when initiatives have taken place. And you know, quite often you go on site and people can't remember what was happening where, when, how, but the significant things tend to be reported in board reports, which are all public documents on their websites. So it's quite nice sometimes to be able to have a quick look at those.
Yeah, but then getting back to Alex's point about the evaluation, you know, we'll see all this different documentation, and you know, it's often been talked as well about the fact that we might go into an organisation and their performance is, you know, challenging, but also, you know, they've got really poor staff morale, as an example. You know, people don't look forward to going to work, all of the staff survey data. And it's, you know, how do you document those sort of things that you experience, that the people you speak to are kind of like going, you know, I don't like coming to work, they don't look after us, they don't do this, they don't do that. I really don't know about that, and I don't know how we document that, but that might be something we could pick up on as well. Nick?
Just an observation, really, but by necessity, that data is all internal to the hospital, isn't it?
Yeah, the vast majority of it is. I mean, we've got some stuff around the discharges, but yeah, most of it is around the acute pathway.
Because it was mentioned on, I think, the Deputy Q call last time, someone modelled the impact of temperature. So that for every degree above, I can't remember, 17 or 19, but if you go above that, your demand starts to go up. You go below that, your demand starts to go up. School holidays impact upon demand. You know, the amount of rainfall impacts on demand, circulating viral stuff. So there is a tendency for us to look internally, like what's on the list about what's driving it. But there's lots of stuff not on the list that also drives activity and demand. Not, you know, seasonality isn't an internal phenomenon, is it? Seasonality is external. So we just need to bear that in mind when we're hypothesizing. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think, I was going to say, all joking aside, there's no joking about this at all. I think what will be really interesting to monitor, I don't know whether everybody is from an NHSE perspective, is the cuts to the winter fuel payments and the potential increase that, you know, it's a nice sunny day, it's a little bit chilly, but I think, you know, when we get into the kind of the teeth of winter, I think looking at the amount of demand from older people, and I also think, but it would need to be a little bit more specific. I think you'd need to have a look at it by deprivation as well, because I'm going to, you know, go out on a limb and say older people from a less deprived area are probably not going to be impacted by this at all. But I'd say older people who live in a more deprived area are potentially going to be more impacted by the cuts to winter fuel payments. That's going to be an interesting one.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. And thanks, Alex and Emma. It was an absolutely fantastic session. There's loads of stuff in the comments. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. Emma.
Sorry, I meant to actually do a thumbs up.
I'm glad it's not just, but you didn't leave though. So quite often people leave. So thanks everyone. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for all your efforts continuing on Rio. hope you have a great. Oh yeah, thanks, Crystal. Sorry, feedback. Please do fill in the feedback. I always forget it every single time. Just to make sure
Well, at
that
least
we're
you're
on the right
consistent.
track. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take that, Chris.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone, and have a great weekend when everything arrives. Take care.
No problem. Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.